thank you. So today's session is Spicing Up Your Training, and it will be facilitated by me, Laura Weber. I am the Director of Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, the PTI, in North Carolina, and part of the Region B TA team. And Terri, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. And I am Terri Leyton, and I am the Technical Assistance Coordinator for Region B, and I work with Laura at Exceptional Children's Assistance Center in North Carolina, as well as our PTI in Georgia with Debbie Tucker and Stephanie Moss in Region B.
Great. So we're adding people as we're going along. So just a quick overview before we get started. When we were originally asked to do this training, it was a face-to-face. So once we decided to go virtual, Terri and I really had to figure out what do we do for SPICE in virtual trainings. So we are glad that you have joined us. And so we want to start with, first I'm going to say this is very odd for me. I'm very used to seeing people's faces and looking at some body language. And I'm used to standing. So sitting in this chair is very odd, but it's the world we live in. It's rather odd at the moment. So for an interactive video training, which is what Terri and I planned for you for the next hour, please leave your camera on as if you're attending in person. Right, this gives us the big panoramic screen. We can see if somebody's hand is raised. We can see if somebody's needed to leave. And just like you would in a in-person training, your seat would just be empty. So if we see your empty seat, we know that you're coming back. Okay, the second one. Oh, thank you, Allison. Allison says she uses a standing desk and stand during trainings. That's great. Thanks, Allison. All right, so mute your microphone until you need to speak, or like Allison, put something in the chat box. We have several activities. We invite you to participate, but we certainly understand if you choose not to. Raise your hand or use the chat function. And then we have a tool, a reflection sheet, that you should have, should have been uploaded with the rest of the documents. We're going to be using that reflection sheet as we go through the training. So if you want to quickly download it, we created it so that you could type right into it. And it really is key things that you're going to want to take with you when you leave the session. And then lastly, due to time constraints and the number of participants, we may not be able to get to everything in the chat. Right now we have 93 participants. So email us with questions. We really would like to have a conversation with you, but this just isn't a forum with 93 people that allows us to do that adequately. So if we didn't cover something you wanted, or you want to know how something worked or why we did it and it didn't work, just email us. Okay. So Debbie wants to know, where do we download the document?
That's onion, normal onion. Yeah. I love my hair. This isn't a black pair of mine.
Beautiful. You said it rhymes, Sharon.
Alejandra, could you please mute yourself? There you go. Great. And Terri, where would people find the document?
It should be in Whova somewhere on the page where you went to enter this session.
Right.
I'm not exactly sure what it looks like.
It really isn't just where you click to join, just scroll down. Sandra says it's shared in the file.
And there is a version in Spanish and a version in English.
Great. And then Sue did one further. Thanks, Sue. She put the link right in the chat box for you. Thank you very much. All right, so the objectives of what we're going to cover today. We are going to cover describing the role of icebreakers. And I can see some eyes rolling right now. But icebreakers have a very important role in training. we are going to talk about writing measurable learning objectives, sort of the scaffolding for your training. And I know you've probably heard these a million times, but we're going to review adult learning principles. We're going to list some of the methods of facilitation that add some ways to enhance learning. And then we're going to explore the use of tools to spice up online trainings. And then before we leave, we're going to describe the role of closures in a training. So these are the objectives we will cover in the training. If you have questions outside of these objectives, please email us, because we can't guarantee you that we can get to them during this training. If we can, we will try very hard to do it. All right, if people are ready, we're going to move next. Terri?
Yeah, so one of the things about having a training session is that we like to know who's with us, who's in our session, and how you might be interacting with us. So we have a poll, actually a few polls. And we are obviously national, and it's fun to have people coming in from places that we haven't had a chance to interact with before, or maybe I haven't. Anyway. All right, and our third question is, how many years have you been facilitating trainings? So are you rather new at this, at 0 to 2 years? Are you a little more experienced with 3 to 5 years, 6 to 10, 10 plus? Go ahead and put that in the chat.
Oh, Terri, people are way ahead of you. 22 years, 10 years, 9 years, 30, 0 to 2. Sylvia's 10 plus. Robin's 11. Lisa is 1 year and a retired elementary school teacher. So Lisa has a bazillion years. Laura Martinez is 23. Anna is 5. Vanda is 6. So we're looking at the majority of people, Terri, really are looking at that 5 to 6 plus range, with a few people a little bit lower than that. Oh, and Judy Wiley says, feels like a million.
Well, then, you know, hopefully you've already got some spice in your trainings, those of you that have been in this for a while, but maybe we can introduce a new flavor to your spice cabinet today. And
well,
for those of
you can share one of your spices with us.
That's true. Okay, great. Thank you for all that great participation. We really appreciate the interaction. All right. Now, this is where we get a little bit more spice, and hopefully this works for us. But first, we're going to talk about it a little bit. Breakout rooms can be difficult when it comes to having a captioner and an interpreter in your session, because it doesn't work out as well when you need those accommodations. So if you do need those accommodations of captioning and interpretation, do not go into the breakout room. Stay in the main room. For everybody else, we're going to attempt to work out the breakout sessions as an introduction to how they can work. So once you're in the breakout room, these are your instructions. Say your name in your parent center. We have a lot of folks, so we really do need to be brief in order to make this work well. You're going to say your name and your parent center, and then your animal personality training style. Sounds complicated, but it's really not. So are you a dolphin? You are enthusiastic, creative, and engaging. Are you an octopus? Intellectual and strategic. Are you a flamingo? Majestically awkward. Or are you a squirrel? Easily distracted and a little nutty. So I'm going to attempt to do the breakout session.
And just a quick reminder, if you need any of the accommodations, you don't go into a breakout session.
Okay. And okay, here they are, breakout rooms at the top of the list. And Michelle, would you mind assisting Laura and I? We were going to originally ask Debbie Tucker to help us out with this. I'd like to break us into 3 rooms and then have the folks that need captioning and interpretation stay in the main room. in my session, we had a lot of dolphins and a lot of octopi, and some of them also identified as squirrels. And I had one that said she kind of identified as everybody. So what was it like in your session, Laura?
Oh, people made up new animals. We had an octopus with a squirrel head and a flamingo mixed with somebody else. So people did not, they saw themselves and their training style as a mixture of more than just one. So we really were all over the place. And then we had somebody just make up a whole new animal that we need to add next time. It was a very creative session, so thank you all.
Now you should be seeing on your screen that says Purpose of Icebreakers, a picture of an ice barge kind of crunching up and breaking through the ice.
Yep.
Okay, great. So the purpose of the Icebreakers is an activity to be fun and brief and related to the topic. So we chose, what is your facilitation style? What's your personality when you're facilitating a training session? We want you to make connections. If we were in a room together, we'd be making connections with each other. All the octopi might identify with each other, and all of the dolphins would identify with each other, and the squirrels would be looking at the shiny things, and the flamingos might be falling off their chairs. We don't know. We don't know, but they would all be identifying with each other and making connections around the room. And hopefully in a breakout session like we just did, we were able to connect with other people. We got to see each other because we had our pictures up on the screen. Mm-hmm. And it helped you to get your brain ready for the content. You were preparing to receive information about facilitations and trainings. So at this time, we would like for you, yes,
Can
Laura?
I just add one more thing there,
Mm-hmm.
Terri? Thanks.
Yeah.
So a lot of people roll their eyes at icebreakers. I hate them. They're dumb. I don't know why we do them. But in the training world, they have a real purpose, right? They're not just chosen out of the blue, like this is my favorite one to do, so I'm going to do it for every single training. They really are all the things that Terri said, which is to break up through all the clutter that's already in people's brains, right? Because you don't enter a training with your brain in neutral, you enter a training with your brain full. And to make connections and content that actually help the brain shift gears to the content that you're getting ready to present. So in training school, the recommendation for icebreakers is pretty powerful in terms of helping people both get ready for the training and helping training stick in people's heads when they leave. Thanks, Terri.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So at this time, if you would turn to your reflection sheet, please, and make some notes about what it is that you want to take away about icebreakers, and we'll give you about a minute to do so.
And if you want to put it in the chat, go ahead. Okay, it is, it's to warm up for the presentation, exactly, Kathy. And Jim says they should be utilized to jog the brain to empty and to prepare for the new content that's coming in. Perfect. Gina, how do we create really engaging icebreakers with large groups virtually? Well, if you can answer that for us, great. Ours were polls and breakout rooms, but we can talk more about that, but you're right. Bridget says it's to make a connection. And does anybody want to read what's on their sheet? Oh, and Vanda says to emotionally connect the audience to the presenter. And Vanda, that's truly very important. People tend to learn from people they've connected with rather than ones that they haven't. You know that old saying, I now I can't think what that old saying is.
It's an old saying.
Yes, right. My brain is old, right? So all that oldness will just get
That's not what
lost.
I was saying.
So it'll come back and I'll say, but it's something like all right, I'll come back to that one.
Okay. And if we're ready to move on, then we will talk about measurable learning objectives. And for anybody that can't see this, the picture shows a target with a green dart shot right in the middle, spot on. So what do measurable learning objectives do for you? Well, they create a learning framework. They define the scope of the training. They purposely present the content, and they give you the ability to measure the learning. So basically, they're the foundations of your training. They help you choose the content and help the participants know what to expect. And when you're creating your evaluation tool, you have those objectives to fall back on and say, did we hit all of these outcomes that we wanted to when we're creating that evaluation survey? And many of you are the parents of children with special needs. And so you've written IEP goals that are basically the same thing. I mean, when my daughter was young, I have a 15-year-old daughter with Down syndrome. At the time, we would write goals, and then underneath it, we would write these objectives. It's the same thing. You're putting, this is the content, and these are how you're going to achieve facilitating and training that content. They describe what you want people to know walking out of the room, being able to ground your training in these learning objectives. Okay. So there are 3 types of learning objectives. And again, I'm going to describe for anyone who can't see what's on the screen. We have 3 circles that intersect almost like a Venn diagram. One says attitude, one says skills, and one says knowledge. So those are the 3 types of learning objectives. And attitudes are what you want your participants to believe and feel about, in this instance, working with families. And what can the staff do? That is what relates to the skills. And knowledge relates to the content and information that staff have available to them. So, with the attitudes, it's what you want the participants of your facilitation, your training, to walk out of believing that they can do or know. And then the skills is what they actually can do. They can implement those things. And knowledge, you want them to know. That's what they're leaving with.
And Terri, if I may just, the one that seems to be hardest for most is attitude, right? But we weave it into our work all the time, right? We weave attitudinal values into our work, like families are the experts of their children. Pretty common one, right? Families know what's best for their children. So those are attitudinal components. And, if it's staff training, staff will have empathy for the families they work with. So an attitudinal, can anybody give an example of what an attitudinal learning objective might be? Okay, I told you they were the hardest. So for example, how effective are we in training if families know the components of an IEP, but they don't feel empowered enough to put them in place, right? So Jarla, thank you. Jarla just put, learners would feel confident in their advocacy efforts, right?
That's a good one. Mm-hmm.
Right, we would need to tweak it just a little bit for a clear learning objective, but the concept is right on the money. And if we don't weave those into our trainings, right? And Karen, they could learn they have a voice that counts, right? So we could have it that parents can describe that their voice makes a difference. They could list the reasons why them speaking up matters, right? But if we're not weaving those concepts into training, we're missing one of the foundational pieces, is that whether or not families actually can do it. They may be able to do it, right? If you have them write it out on paper, but can they do it do they feel confident enough or skilled enough or their voice matters? And then Kristen says, have more, whoa, Kristen, chat went away. Have more information to better participate in the team process. Exactly. Parents will feel confident in participating in the team process. Yeah, so Jim, right, share some of my stories so it relates to their experience. But it's writing the learning objective that makes sure you include it in your training. Is that making sense to folks? I can see faces, so you can nod your head yes or no. My Missy says yes. Okay. Great.
Okay. Well, and then if you don't, email us afterwards and we can kind of work through some of that, because they are difficult. And we went through a process about 1.5 years ago in our own center, just kind of like looking at our trainings and whether or not they actually had measurable learning outcomes, and had our staff rewrite them. So that's something that we could, if we were in person, we could have worked through. Okay, it's a little harder to do in the chat. All right. So when you are writing your measurable learning outcomes, we're using verbs for that. So when it comes to attitudes, can the person demonstrate, reflect, choose what it is that you've been training them to do? With knowledge, this is kind of like taking a test in school. You're going to list, you're going to describe, you're going to explain how to write learning measurable outcomes, for instance. And then with the skills, you would practice or demonstrate or develop. Are there any other verbs that you can think of that we might use for these, for writing learning measurable learning outcomes? If so, you can pop them in the chat. Okay, and if not, there are a couple of chats down in there.
Discuss, explain, perfect. These are perfect, right? You can measure when somebody can share. You can say, could you please share it? Whether they can discuss it or whether they can explain it. Great job. Demonstrate, Marlo, great job. Okay.
Okay. So at this time, we'd like you to go back to your reflection sheet, please. And under the learning objectives section, just go ahead and think of things that you might want to take home with you, or you probably are at home, to put in practice in your own training sessions. And we'll give you about a minute to do so. And if there are any questions on this before we move on, please feel free to put them in the chat. You know, we might not be able to get to them all, but we can try to address a few of them. And I can't see whether there are any questions, Laura, so if you see any pop up in the chat.
I definitely will let you know. I've been looking.
All right, so we'll move on from here, and Laura will take over. There's a little fly, sorry, on the next slide.
Bridget just put one. Attendee will be able to locate resources on the website. It's perfect, right? Okay, so moving on in the interest of time, on the screen we have 2 images. One is children sitting in a classroom and their desks are in rows equally spaced apart, though not 6 feet. And there is a teacher standing in the front of the room with a blackboard. The other picture is a group of adults sitting around a table with computers in front of them and papers in front of them, and they are, 2 of them are laughing, a couple of them are laughing. Okay, so what these pictures represent are the difference between pedagogy and andragogy, right? Pedagogy is the teaching of children, and andragogy is the teaching of adults. But most of us have not been taught really, unless we're in elementary school like some of you were, either of them, right? So, you know, I learned how to be officially when I had to start doing training. It was because my job told me I had to. And then they told me, well, just watch so-and-so and then go do it. Well, there's a whole lot more to it than just go watch so-and-so and go do it, right? There's objectives. There's putting, those of you who are elementary school teachers, you know this better than anybody, right? And then it's building the scaffolding of the training around the objectives and then filling in the activities. But unfortunately, we just don't generally tend to teach people how to teach adults. So we do what we know. I mean, most of us sat in a classroom similar to that one in some way, shape, or form and had training, teaching, where somebody stood at the front of the classroom and told us, filled up our empty brains with all the information they thought we needed to know. And we know from experience, from all of us sitting in those classrooms, it could have been hit or miss, right? But we didn't have a choice, because if we didn't go to those classrooms, the truancy officer would come. So no matter how bad they were, we still had to sit there. And those of us who were lucky enough to get some really good teachers, and the truth is most of us were able to learn. But there is a real science around teaching adults, andragogy, right? And it isn't the picture on the left with people sitting in rows doing independent work. So Terri, could you go to the next slide, please? So back in the 50s, researchers, particularly Malcolm Knowles, started researching how adults learn, right? And he came up with these 7 principles that have been kind of permutated over the years, but it is, adults are self-directed. Adults generally don't like being told what to do. They like to find the information they need. And that we have accumulated knowledge, right? Which is the second principle. So we don't come in not knowing the times table, or we don't come in knowing some of the elements of our job already. We have accumulated knowledge that ideally training builds on that accumulated knowledge. Number 3, adults are goal-oriented. We usually go to a training for a reason. Occasionally our employer may say you have to go to this training, but the reason there is also very clear. If they're telling us we have to go to a training, there is something we need to learn. So goals, adults really are goals. And Mary Jacobs said she wrote the Knowles Principles into her grant this time. Now, Mary, you got to hold yourself to it. All right, adults are relevancy oriented. So what does that mean? They want things that are relevant to them. Like, I really don't want to learn astrophysics. It's not relevant to anything I do in my life, right? I may want to learn. So the content has got to be relevant to what is happening in adults' lives. And then the learning is relevant to the current role. So if I'm going to a training for my job, I want to be able to leave with something related to my job. Otherwise, I don't have enough time, effort, or energy to put into sit through a training that I'm really not going to be able to use. And then number 6, adults are practical. They want things given to them in a very practical, easy manner, which means sometimes a lot of theory flies right out the window. or sometimes a lot of details on laws flies right out the window, right? Because I can't use it. So you got to make it practical. The content's important, but making it practical for me to use. And then number 7, adults, like all learners, really need to be shown respect. And those of you who are teachers know this to be true as well, right? So, so these 7 adult learning principles really are how we deliver the content. The learning objectives is how we develop the content, and the principles are what we keep in mind on when we deliver the content. So any comments about adult learning principles or andragogy versus pedagogy? Okay. All righty. So next slide, Terry. So this is really, Missy said it's interesting the names of the 2 learning styles, and it is, and it comes from Latin. Ped is child, I guess andro is adult, right? And OG is learning. But anyhow, so the next slide is understanding the power of effective facilitation. So you can know the content all day long, and you can be the expert in your own little world and the expert in working with families. But if you can't convey that content to other people, you're not an expert as a trainer. And the good news is we all can learn new training styles, right? We're smart people. We can learn this. It's not rocket science. And for many of us, sometimes no one just never taught it to us before. So we're going to watch a brief video clip that if that doesn't convince you to do something different, I don't know what will. And so it's a YouTube video. And it is a clip from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is a very old movie, so I just keep showing my age over and over and over again. And the clip is going to be about a high school teacher teaching, I think it's civics. But if you know what else he's really teaching, just let me know. But I think it's civics. So it's only about 1.5 minutes, and it will be closed caption as we go through. And so for those of you who may not necessarily be able to see it, it is a teacher standing at the blackboard with a bunch of stuff written on the blackboard, turning towards a class of students who are not engaged at all. They may be dribbling on their desk and sleeping. They may be blowing bubbles, but that's the essence of the video, is a very boring teacher and very unengaged young people. So Terry, would you play the video, please?
Anyone? The Great Depression passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics, voodoo economics.
So there's someone who is not using engaging facilitation practices. And the truth is I've been using this video, excuse me, in trainings probably for about as old as Ferris Bueller is. And I still can't remember what the Laffer curve is, right? I've probably seen this 50 times. So clearly this is a training style that violates every principle of adult learning we just talked about. Terry, next slide, please. So here's the other reason. So here's a quiz. You ready for your quiz? Da-da-da-da. A lecturer speaks at the rate of blank words per minute. How many words per minute do you think a lecturer can speak at? Put it in the chat, please. 105, good guess. 100, 120, 80. Okay. 65. Okay, so not far off, right? A lecturer speaks at, somewhere around 100 to 150 words per minute. Now, before I moved down to the South, when I was in upstate New York, I spoke a whole lot faster. But generally, we speak about 150 words per minute. Now, we can listen at a rate of how many words per minute? Okay, Debbie says 50, 73, 60. All right, y'all going in the wrong way. We can listen at about 400 words per minute. All right, how many of you have the TV on while you're on the phone or doing text or listening to your kids? Absolutely. Our brains are such fabulous instruments that our brains are going zip, 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 and our mouths are going zip, zip, zip. So while we're talking, our brains are doing other things, right? They're calculating other things. They're doing it because we're not using our brain capacity in listening. Yet one more reason why, and Kanika says listening, hearing, and comprehension are very different. It's correct, but if we're, so one of the things is using lecture only, people's brains tend to float on to do other things because their brains can do much more things than just listen at that fewer words per minute. All right. So we're moving on to the next. Lisa says, how many? She's missed it. She's a squirrel. Your brain was doing something else, Lisa. That's what was happening. I was talking too slow. About 400 words a minute. Depends on who you ask. So don't come back to me and say, no, it's 452. Because these are approximates to illustrate the point. So one of the other ways to present information electronically. Now, it's much easier to do when you're face-to-face, right? We'd be having all kinds of activities up and down, in and out, moving all over. Well, I'm glued to this chair. But Jamboard is an activity that you can do on online training to make it more interactive, to help keep yanking people's brains back to your content, because that's what it's a constant battle to do, right? Brains want to go, they're not engaged enough. So Terri, are you going to pull up Jamboard or put it in the chat?
I am going to put it in the chat.
Okay, and Terry's going to put it in the chat, and we'd like you to click on that link. If you can't see it, we will explain it. So,
Okay.
The chat. So click
All
on
right. And now I'm going to also share my screen so that you can see it if you don't want to click on it. Okay?
Okay.
All right.
So we'll give you a second to click on it, and I can see people are joining. And the cool thing about Jamboard is it gives you different names. So the leopard just joined, the anonymous coyote joined, jackalope joined. So the Jamboard is an activity where we would use what we would use in a face-to-face training, sticky notes, right? They're the cornerstone of every trainer. Little sticky notes where people can write things on and stick them up. And you can get feedback on what's working. You can get all kinds of things. So what is posted on the screen is the question.
I'm laughing because I can see people interacting with it and I love it. They're changing the background. They're clicking on the sticky notes.
Okay. So what it looks like on the screen is a whole bunch of sticky notes that are numbered. And the numbers will keep going up based on the number of people that we have. And somebody just turned it off. So now
They cleared our frame.
okay,
well,
can we get
there we go. We'll go over to the next frame.
Okay, so what we'd like you to do is click on a stick number and type a method of presenting information other than lecture. Okay?
Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate here on number 23. I click on it and I can see the little white circle up in the top right corner, and there are 3 little dots. Click on that and then click the word edit, and a button will open up to a text box, and you can type in here. And I'm just wrote the word type, but we would like you to write.
Oh yeah, here it is already. People are doing it.
And if you run out of stickies on this page, you can click the right arrow and go to a new frame.
Anonymous Hedgehog just joined. Thank you, Hedgehog.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the Anonymous Buffalo just joined. Okay, so we're seeing really great things come up on the screen, like think, pair, share, exactly. Dance, exactly. Infographics. Sing a song. Sorry, I've got to move to see what's on the rest of them. Cooperative groups. Kahoot, I don't know what Kahoot is. Actually, I did hear of Kahoot, so I need somebody to remind me of what Kahoot is.
My son uses it in school a lot. It's a like a quiz show type of game.
Great.
Yeah.
Games, exercise, anecdotal, personal sharing. These are all perfect. And I'm
curious to see if anybody put anything on the other one. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So if we wanted to, we could organize these. We could move them all around. But really, we really just wanted to get at some of the content and show you a new way, if you didn't know about it, of making it more interactive.
Great. And it looks like in the chat, a few people who didn't want to interact with Jamboard said, poll anywhere, word bubble. That was Emily. And Marlo said 4 corners. Nelsinia said an instant survey or poll. And Nakatia, I'm sorry that you couldn't get into it. Oh, the Jamboard was deleted. I think the screen had gotten cleared, so that may have been just momentary.
But great. So these are all excellent ways to make scavenger hunt. So you all know this. So I could go to any one of your trainings and not just sit through a lecture. I'm very confident. So thank you. Okay.
And this is a Google Suite offering. So if you have Google Suite, you can get into this software. There's also a hardware version of it, but it's really expensive. I'm not sure that any of us would actually have it in our offices. But it's a fun thing that you can do on an interactive like this. It just is not accessible for someone who is using a screen reader. So if you had someone in your session that needed that accommodation, you would need to either explain it like we did or not use that option, just use the chat function instead.
Great. All right, Terry, so time is a-ticking.
Yes, it is. Okay, this is you.
Oh, that's right. All right, so I'll give you a tip about co-facilitating, right? So I'm a terrible talker over people. So all my slides have black headings. All Terry's slides have blue headings. So I know not just to run all over Terry. So you mentioned a bunch of them, the methods of facilitation, right? And they work, some of them you can do virtually, some of them clearly don't work well. But lecture, small group, discussion, role play, practice, activities, hands-on simulation. And then one that's not up there is kinesthetic activities, activities where people are getting up and moving, right? Somehow it gets the brain engaged in a different way. All right, Terry?
Yes.
Okay, so if you would take a section on your reflection sheet, just please make a note under methods of facilitation. And that also relates to why you might want to rely on something other than lecture. And you can either write it in the chat or write it on your computer. But the chat you can't take away with you. The sheet you can. And we'll give about 1 minute for this. Art. Oh, so people are still adding to the other things, art and storytelling. Yeah. So we are looking for a quick reflection on the adult learning principles, lecture, and methods of facilitation. Ah, Bridget, you can save chat. It's in the bubble on the top right area of the text. And Bridget, that is wonderful. And the mere fact that people have to write something on their sheet or write it somewhere is yet another way that learning sticks in people's heads. The more senses we can use, the more likely learning is to stick.
I am definitely a tactile learner. I'm a writer. I keep notebooks full of notes that I may never go back to, but as long as it goes through my hand and through the paper, it goes into my head.
Which is part of the purpose of the reflection sheet. All right, Faye, the reflection sheet was in the Zoom with the agenda, but I think in the interest of time, we are going to move on.
Okay, so on the picture in this on this next screen, it says making online learning interactive. Is a computer screen with an image of a person and all different little bubbles above his head. There's a music icon and a map icon and an idea, light bulb, little emojis and video. So those were all symbols of ways to make online learning interactive. And hopefully you saw today ways that you can make online learning interactive. We have a list here of things that we did in our session, but if you see, or if you can think of something that you've done in your online sessions that we didn't do today, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. We obviously used a program where we can see each other, such as Zoom. There are others. We asked you questions and had you write in the chat. We read the chat comments and questions, and we named the people who put those comments in the chat. And that's important for connecting with your audience when you're kind of anonymous, especially when it's a parent session that you're giving at a parent training center. You might not know the people on the other end. Like, we know some of you because you're in our region. But it helps to connect with your audience to do that. Using polls, our poll didn't work today, but we did have a poll at the beginning, and you can sprinkle them throughout your session. We could have put one in the beginning, one in the middle, and one at the end. You can also use polls to help you gauge whether the information that you're getting across is actually sticking with your participants. We used video. The breakout room. And I will say today's breakout rooms were probably a little unwieldy just because we had 90 something participants. We had about 30 in each of the 3 breakout rooms. You would normally want to do that in an ideal situation with about 10 people per breakout session, just so that you can get a better discussion going on. Today we did it as a demonstration, as that it's a possibility. And we use Jamboard. Any other interactive software that you could do online could take the place of Jamboard. And music. We had some music at the very beginning where we were just kind of like, oh, hey, waking you up. You maybe just came out of lunch and were feeling a little bit lethargic at that point. So let's see what other people said that they've done in.
Only Karen said Edpuzzle. But somebody asked, did we always have 2 people in a virtual session? And I answered that we try to, because some people connect more with one person than another. we provide backup for each other. And sometimes one of us fills in a piece of content that the other one might have not been remembered. And it is also because, technical glitches happen. And if Terry's computer was to go down or my computer was to go down, then the session can continue. And Kiyomari, I hope I said your name right, says, a second co-host is helpful, as there be times that she's had a lagging or got kicked out, and then the other person keeps it moving.
Right. And in this situation, I'm showing my screen and I don't see the chat as easily because of that. So Laura is able to read the chat out loud. She's seeing it in real time.
Right. And so Sue says they usually have two people. One is facilitator, reading questions, the presenter can't see, handling technical issues, etc. So yeah, generally we do try to have two. It's a really great question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Were there other pieces of technology that make your learning interactive?
If you find them, would you send them to us, please? We're always on the lookout.
Yeah, definitely.
And we love to share ideas. So anyhow, they, if you think of any, send them to us. And if it was an in-person training, we'd have all your names and information and we'd send it back out to you. But so sad, too bad right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next slide, please.
All right, so we're back to our reflection sheet, and if you would just please take a moment to complete the section on your reflection sheet under online learning.
Hey, Terry, I just got 3 minutes left, so I'm wondering if we just don't jump to closures.
We can do that, and I'm sure because they can process two things at one time.
That's right, you can write and listen. So closures, the slide shows a jar with two lids on it. They're as important as openers. Openers open up the brain for learning, closers seal it back in. So they help activities stick, and they identifies takeaway items to do later. The worst thing about training is you go and you sit there and you go home and you put all that good information you got into a big pile right on top of that other pile that got built up on your desk while you were in the training. And you really just don't get to it. So these little one-page reflection sheets are ways that it's easy to keep track of one sheet rather than a whole pile of stuff that gets squished between another pile. So our closing activity, Terry, would be to complete the final section of your reflection sheet. This includes filling in one action item. And before we get cut off, we would then ask people to complete the action item. Well, I have 3 minutes on my phone, but anyhow, complete the action item and then share what it is. So now you're writing the action item and you're verbalizing the action item. So Bridget said her action item is Jamboard. Anybody else? Lisa loved the animal personalities. Bridget said would be great in STEM. Darla updated learning objectives. So they're the things that we either learned or we want to do, or that we were reminded of and we want to do. So Corin says music and better visuals for her training. Animal personalities, loved it. That was all Terry. So as you can see, there are things that an action item, and an action item is something you want to take away and use. So I think we're probably pretty close to the end of our time. Oh, we need the reminder, since Terry, this slide isn't labeled blue or black.
Yeah. So this one is for both of us or either of us. We just ask you, first of all, thank you for participating in our session today. At one point, I counted like 96 people in the session, which is a lot. And We would really love it if you filled out the evaluation immediately after this session so that you don't forget. So that should be right inside Whova under the survey function.
Okay. Any last comments before we say leave and say thanks so much for your time? Terri and I had to stretch and learn new things when they moved us online and said, okay, now make it spicing up your training virtually. And there's nothing like a great motivator, like, holy, we got an hour and 15 minutes to fill up with virtual stuff. And big credit to Terri, because Terri made most of this happen.
Well, but Laura knows all the theory behind it. So between the two of us, we make a pretty good team.
All right, so we're going to sign off. Please do the evaluation. And we really appreciate all your participation, and email us new things you learn. We want to know about them.